Hi, welcome back to Module 2 of HTML5 Application Development Fundamentals. I'm Cullen, and today we're going to cover how to build the user interface by using HTML5 with a special emphasis on text, graphics, and media. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look at our agenda. We're going to go ahead and overview what HTML is, talk about basic markup and page structure, review some of the basic text elements used in HTML5. We're going to talk about displaying graphics using the canvas and SVG tags, and then focus on how to embed media into our web pages. All right, let's get started. HTML. Hypertext markup language is the language used to provide structure to web pages. HTML uses tags such as P and H1 to perform this function. And so if you take a look over here in the graphic, H1 is a basic header, whereas P allows us to write paragraphs, right? Browsers read this markup language and then render the web pages that we see on screen. Throughout the 2000s, HTML 4.01 was a standard for web pages, but unfortunately it was limited in what it could provide us as users, right? A strong demand for a rich web experience, including audio, video, and interactivity, led to the development of a new HTML standard. That standard is HTML5. W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, is a standards organization that was responsible for the development of HTML5. The standard encompasses not just HTML and its markup tags, but also cascading style sheets, JavaScript, and a couple of other different libraries that are available that we'll cover later in the course. One thing that's really important to know is that HTML5 is platform independent, which means that it can work on a variety of different browsers, and it'll always render in a very similar fashion, not always the same though. Let's talk about a couple of things that are brand new with HTML5. We've got audio and video tags. We've got the canvas element, which allows us to draw graphics on the web page. We've got media queries, which detect the type of screen that we're using, so whether we're on a smartphone or a laptop or a desktop. And then we also have new application programming interfaces, and that allows us with a quicker way to access digital and hardware resources. Finally, you might have something like geolocation, which allows us to access our latitude and longitude, our location, wherever we're walking around about town. All right, let's take a look at some of the basic markup and page structure with HTML. So like, how do we actually create a document? A tag is where it all starts. And a tag is just a basic keyword surrounded by some angle brackets. It's going to look a little bit like these. Most tags come in pairs, right? We've got our opening tag up there at the top, and then we have our closing tag there at the bottom. So opening tags right here, closing tags right here. The difference is that the closing tag features a / in front of the keyword. A tag pair is often going to be referred to as an element, so make sure that if you hear me switch back and forth between tag and element, that you know that they're the same thing. All right, and so here you can see those tags in action. You see the opening tag, the head, and then you see the closing tag, the head, same thing, HTML, and there's our closing tag there as well. All right, so let's talk about some of the common HTML tags that you may have just seen in our last example. You've got the HTML tag, which defines the document as an HTML document. We have our head, which contains code used by the browser. This is information that we would never see if we're taking a look at a web page. Next, we've got the body, and that's actually where the content that we see on a page is located. And then you've got things like paragraphs, links, headers, images, all sorts of good stuff there. Tags are not just used alone, right? We have to use attributes in order to describe how data should be rendered on a web page. Attributes are used to provide additional information, okay? And so this might be a URL or something along those lines. Each element has a specific set of attributes that can be used with it. There are some global attributes, however, which can be used with any element. Attributes added using the syntax located below, right? So here we have our tag keyword, which is A. This is for a link. We've got our href attribute, which has a value of www.bing.com, and then our text, which would actually be the hyperlink that we would click on a page in order to go visit Bing. Creating some awesome web pages requires us to combine elements and their attributes in order to create something that's really engaging for users. When two or more elements apply to the same block of content, then we have to nest tag pairs or nest elements. Nesting is the process of simply placing one element inside of another, and here the outside element is called a parent, while the inner is called a child. You can take a look at this sentence down below here. We have, I love taking my dog for a walk. M stands for emphasis, and here we're able to emphasize the child here of love, and that's a really ugly line, so sorry about that. Within the paragraph, or just the sentence here, I love taking my dog for a walk. HTML also allows us to use some special characters. These special characters are called entities, and they include things like percent signs, copyright symbols, all sorts of good stuff there. If we don't include things like entity names or special codes for these different entities, then they won't actually render on screen. Causes us some pretty big problems. Each special character is just simply, once again, reproduced by its entity name or the number code, right? The numerical code. So each entity starts with an ampersand. So these guys right here are ampersands, and they end with a semicolon. Once again, my ugly circles here. Should probably be drawing them with my finger instead of a mouse, but don't always get it right, right? All right. Next, we've got a doc type declaration. Every HTML web page includes a doc type declaration. In HTML 4.01, we had a really, really ugly doc type that involved a little bit more work and a little bit more thinking, all right? In HTML5, they've simplified the doc type declaration in order to make it a little bit easier for us to type, right? So all we have to do is type the exclamation mark doc type HTML, and all of a sudden we have identified a page or a document as an HTML document. Much, much easier than an HTML4. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some HTML5 elements in action here. I'm going to head over to WebMatrix, which is a wonderful piece of software designed by Microsoft. It's free as well, which is absolutely tremendous as far as I'm concerned. And let's go ahead and take a look here at our elements demo, right? So here we've got all these familiar tags that we just talked about, our doc type declaration, our HTML tags, our head tags, the meta tag, and then the title tag, which we didn't talk about previously, but title actually is going to provide the title, it's semantic, of our web page that you're going to see up in a tab or at the top of a browser window. Body, of course, is where all of our content's going to appear, and we create that content with a header and a simple paragraph here. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and right-click my HTML document, and I'm going to launch it in the browser and check it out. There in the tab, we see our title, HTML5 elements in action, and then we've got our header and our paragraph. So pretty easy stuff. We've created a simple web page there. Let's go ahead and exit out of our browser and head back to our presentation. All right, so let's talk about some text elements now in HTML5. Excuse me. When we want to type text, we start typically using a paragraph element, but you can type it without a paragraph element too. Sometimes we want to modify that text, right? And we modify it using some really simple inline elements. We have B, which is for bold text, EM for emphasized text that appears bold on a page, I, which defines italicized text, small, which is smaller text, literally is just smaller text, strong, which is going to define important text, which is going to appear bolded on the screen, and then we have sub and sup. Sub defines subscript text, and then sup defines superscript text, like if you are squaring X or something along those lines. Whatever kids do in math class these days. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look here at the text element demo, just so we can go ahead and get an understanding of how these elements work in line. So I'm going to launch it in the browser here, and we'll go back and review in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and go to split screen so it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So here in our code, notice that we've used the M tag in order to emphasize the word sum, and then we've used the strong tag in order to bold the word nested elements. So we go back to our web page. Here we see sum is italicized, so this page includes some nested elements, right? Because nested elements are super important, so we want to make sure to use the strong element to suggest that. All right. Heading back over to our presentation here. In HTML5, some of the text elements have new functionality. So in HTML4, bold was used to emphasize text by making it bold. Now it just stylistically offsets, so it just appears bold, right? There's no importance in the page. With I, a very similar situation where it's used to make text italic, right? Its functionality in HTML5 is to provide an alternative voice or mood. With strong, we label it with strong importance while making it appear bold, and then with emphasize, we go ahead and we indicate emphatic stress while also making it appear italic. So we have a couple of new elements with strong and M that don't just style the text, but they also provide extra meaning as well. There are some text elements that are no longer used too, and this is actually, we call this deprecation, right? And it's the process of removing elements. So if you ever go to a web page, you navigate and you take a look at the source code, you might see some of these deprecated elements used in code, but that doesn't mean that you should go ahead and use them as well. There are actually some new elements that you can use in order to replace these older deprecated elements. Right, so we want to use the abbreviation element for acronyms. We want to use the object element for applet, right? And then we use CSS or cascading style sheets for a couple of those other elements as well, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. There was a strike-through element which represented deleted text, but now there's a new semantic tag that allows us to go ahead and strike through called delete. One of my favorite ones if I ever need to make sure that people understand I'm trying to delete text. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick transition here. And now that we've talked about text, let's talk about graphics. There isn't a good web page that doesn't have graphics, and graphics can take a lot of different forms. They can take the form of pictures, they can take the form of shapes, crazy robots or zombies or vampires, whatever it happens to be. All right, images, clearly, super important, and there are two categories that you should be aware of. We've got raster images. There's one there on the left of my dog Stella. I'm just joking, that's not my dog. It's a picture I stole from one of those photo frames at a store. You know what I'm talking about. And then the one on the right there, which is a vector image of a robot. Raster images are made up of these tiny little things called pixels that can be different colors, while vector images are made of lines and curves. Vector images don't distort when they're increased in size, but raster images do. So it becomes a lot harder for us to be able to see a raster image with clarity if we increase it from its natural size. Here's a quick slide that reviews that. A couple of things that are really important to note are that raster images can include the file formats of JPEG, PNG, GIF, and bitmap. They really do pixelate when they're enlarged, so be really careful when you're increasing the size of a raster image. Vector images, of course, they're made with different programs like Photoshop or Corel Draw, and then they're converted into PNG and GIF formats. They definitely do maintain their quality when they're enlarged, and it's pretty cool to see. It's sort of like if you created a PowerPoint presentation and you made a square, and you can shrink that square and it appears the same way if it's super tiny, just like this, versus if you make it big, just like this, okay? So keep those things in mind. All right, so let's talk about how to embed images into our web pages. We use the image tag. It's just IMG surrounded by our brackets. The image tag does require a source and an alt attribute. The source attribute is going to tell us where the file is located, and then the alt attribute is going to provide us with some alternative text for accessibility. So if somebody can't view the image, they're going to be able to see the alternative text or hear the alternative text if they're using a screen reader. And of course, we've got title as well, which signifies the title of the image. Here, my dog Stella, right, is going to be in our example in just a few moments, but that's the title of our image. There's a quick review of the attributes. One thing that's really important to point out here is that you've got the height and the width elements. Like I said, if you have an image that's really, I guess, really poor pixel density, in other words, if you increase it in size, it becomes really difficult to see and it's proper quality. You can change the size using the height and width attributes. And I typically do this by simply increasing just the height or the width attribute, or rather modifying just one of those attributes. I'll go ahead and show you in just a few moments when we demo with the image tag. There are a couple of other elements that you can use. There's the figure and fig caption elements. They allow you to just sort of block off an image and then go ahead and add a caption to it. That caption can be added to the top or the bottom. So here we've added it on the top. It can easily be swapped down to the bottom, right? It can also be used, the figure element can also be used to specify the type of figure that's being added, and then also to group images. So if I had like 3 different pictures of my dog Stella, then I could go ahead and add them all within the same figure element. I could nest them all within the same figure element, right? So let's actually go ahead and take a quick look at some code here. So I've got a quick image demo for us. If you take a look here, I've got my image tag pointing to a dog.jpg file, right? It's a picture of my dog Stella, once again. And then below, I've got it using the figure element, right? So that same image is nested inside. Notice the difference here between these two elements. The first one, I've given it a height of 400. The second one, I've given it a width of 300. For the first one, the width will automatically adjust so that it maintains the same ratio with 400 pixels. And similarly, the second image tag, where width is 300, the height will automatically adjust in order to maintain the same ratio, okay? The difference here, of course, is that I've got my fig caption element, so I'm gonna add a caption to that image. So let's see what that looks like in a browser. So you've got the first one here. Notice it is 400 pixels high. I actually have no idea how long pixels are, so just take my word for it, all right? And the second one, we've got the caption here now, and notice that there's a little bit of padding that's been added outside of the image as well. Who wouldn't want to take this dog for a walk, right? They look about the same size. You'll notice though that the second picture is just a little bit bigger because I modified the width instead of the height, right? All right, let's go ahead and head back to the presentation. So in addition to the image element, we also have canvas and SVG elements. The canvas element creates something that's essentially just a blank container for graphics. It's a new element in HTML5, and you can draw graphics using JavaScript, which is another programming language that we're going to talk about really soon, right? You use the Canvas API, so it makes life a little bit easier for you because you don't have to define all of your own functions. Canvas is used to create 2D games, animations, all sorts of good stuff, all sorts of interactivity for web pages. So note though that all this code that's down below, all of this stuff right here, all that it's going to do is just create a blank container. So there's not going to be anything inside on a web page that uses the Canvas element like this, right? Instead, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at this code in just a second on screen. But you can see here, we're using JavaScript, which is defined by those script tags, in order to actually draw a small rectangle. We'll talk about what all this code means in a little while, but simply we're just going to go ahead and we're going to fill a rectangle and then go ahead and make it appear beautiful on screen, right? So, and that rectangle should just be 100 by 200 pixels. So let's go take a look at that demo really fast, right? All right, so Canvas demo, excuse me. It's up on screen here, and it's that same code that we just saw, so I'm just gonna go ahead and launch the browser so we can see that and take a look at that. We have our lovely little rectangle. It's 100 pixels high and 200 pixels wide, okay? You can do way cooler things than that with Canvas, but I figured I'd go ahead and keep it basic for now. Don't hold it against me, okay? All right. So one of the things that you need to be aware of, though, is that if you're using an older browser, like say you go visit grandma, and grandma's using Internet Explorer 6, right? She hasn't updated her browser for a really long time. Well, the Canvas element might not be available on grandma's browser. So you're going to have to go ahead and provide content that will display when a Canvas element doesn't render. Right? The content could be an image or text. So here, all that I did is I went ahead and I put in some sample text for the source attribute, just www.example.com, which is a real website, I might add. And I went ahead and I just added a small rectangle JPEG, and then of course the alt text, a blue rectangle. I probably should have told them how many pixels it was or how big it was so that they could visualize that, but I didn't, right? So that box right there signifies the additional content that we don't want to place in if an older browser doesn't render the Canvas element. So next, let's take a look at scalable vector graphics, right? So scalable vector graphics is actually a language for describing 2D graphics, which is created with XML. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's a really, really cool stuff. Not something that we'll get into in this course, but definitely go ahead and give it a quick Bing search, all right? With SVG, you provide drawing instructions with your code to a browser so that it renders the drawing itself. Here we don't use a source attribute in order to point to a file like we do with images. Graphics created using the SVG element, they're scalable, right? So they're those vector graphics. That's what the V stands for. So the quality of the image won't change if it shrinks or is enlarged. I actually had troubles with getting our browser now to render the SVG graphic. So I'm not going to show you a demo, but this is the type of code that you would want to use in order to draw a rectangle, which is 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Kind of a geeky little programming note here. Notice that it's 100 by 100. That's a square, but all squares are rectangles. Not all rectangles are squares. Keep that in mind, kids. Super important. All right, so when would we want to use Canvas versus SVG? Canvas is something that we'd want to use for small drawings or drawings with a ton of different objects in them. Like I said earlier that we could use Canvas for creating video games, and so it's really great for complex things like that, right? It's good for small screens and then also great for real-time data. So if you have like a stock ticker or maybe you're checking out NBA scores, something along those lines, or maps or weather data, Canvas is absolutely wonderful for that because it'll update in real time. Scalable vector graphics you want to use for larger graphics, which you're not always going to see on a web page. We want to use it for a simple page with less objects in it. And we also want to go ahead and use it for drawings that require a ton of pixels, right? Because it's going to give us a lot of detail. All right, so now let's go ahead and transition our focus to media and HTML5. So any good web page includes images. It also is going to include video and audio, right? Super important. I always catch my students trying to sneak a peek at YouTube whenever we're in the classroom. Doesn't matter what video it is, they're always trying to access websites that contain media or always listening to music. And honestly, I'm the same way too. In fact, I'm in studio right now. I'm pretty sure some folks in here with me are also looking at different videos and maybe even listening to music. I don't know. But one thing that's really important to note about media and HTML5 is that prior to HTML5, this new standard, browsers depended on plugins or media players in order to allow us to watch content on screen. But now we can actually just go ahead and embed video and audio onto a web page using the video and audio tags. All right. You can embed video in just a very simple way. We use the video tag there at the bottom. We want to go ahead and point to the source. So maybe I have a weird cat video. I'm going to go ahead and define the height and width attributes in order to make sure that the video renders properly on screen. Otherwise, it'll just render in its natural state. And note here, we do use a closing tag for video. One thing that I forgot to mention with the image tag is that the image tag doesn't have a closing tag. Next, let's actually go back to that real fast. It's super important, and I can't believe I forgot it. All right, let's take a look at this. So see, note here, we have a /, and that just ends the tag, right? There is no closing tag. There are a couple of other elements that are like that, but not very many. So let's go ahead and speed back through this presentation and keep things rolling, all right? Sorry about that, but I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't mention that. There are a couple different attributes that you can use in order to control video, and these also work well for audio too, with the exception of poster here. So before my video loads, I can go ahead and show a picture, maybe of a cat doing something funny, because that's what people like to look at these days, using the poster attribute. I can also make sure that if somebody visits my webpage, they go ahead and see that video playing from the start with the autoplay attribute. Controls provides us with the play, pause, and fast forward and rewind buttons that we're all used to. And then loop is going to go ahead and play the video on repeat, right? I genuinely don't recommend using the autoplay or the loop attributes because I think it's really annoying when I don't have control of a video. And it's not just about me, but I think that typically tends to be the case for most users of web pages, right? Like you don't want to visit a website and then go ahead and have maybe like not just one video, but 2 or 3 start playing right when you visit. It can be a little annoying, and so you've got to be mindful of your users' needs and wants. So keep that in mind, all right? All right, there are a couple of other different video formats. Excuse me. Most video formats, and actually should say MP4 here, so I'm going to cross that out. MP4 is used by the majority of browsers, right? It's going to render properly, but not all browsers are going to support the same video formats. So we do have a couple of others that you can use. One thing that's really important here is that you can use the source tag in combination with its type attribute to point to the file and specify the file type. And now, when we talk about the different video formats, we're not just going to use MP4. We may want to go ahead and use multiple different types of formats in order to make sure that our videos render properly on screen. And so that leads me to browser compatibility, right? So not all video formats are compatible with browsers. So we want to go ahead and use a couple of different source elements here, one for MP4 and then one for the OGG format. These formats haven't appeared a whole lot on exams that I've taken. I've actually taken the HTML5 App Development Fundamentals exam 2 times, and I have never seen anything on the OGG format, but you should still know it just in case. Super important stuff. All right, next, and I think just about last here, we're gonna go ahead and touch on audio tags. You can go ahead and add audio to a web page with an audio tag and a path that points to the audio file. Similarly, with video, you can use the autoplay, controls, and loop attributes in order to perform the same functions, right? So here, note that instead of just running controls, I also included a value for the controls attribute, which was just controls. It's probably easier if you just go ahead and use shorthand, okay? Just stick to controls alone as the attribute. There are 3 primary formats of audio supported, just as with video. You have OGG, MP3, and WAV. Once again, not every browser is going to support every audio type, so keep that in mind. We just, once again, use the source attribute to include multiple types here, right? So source used 2 times in between the audio tags, so source is nested, and we go ahead and access the MP3 and OGG formats that way. All right, so that's the end of our long journey. Go ahead and do a quick recap here. We talked about HTML, how to use basic markup and page structural elements, how to use text elements. We displayed some images and talked about Canvas and SVG. And finally, we talked about how to embed media in HTML5. Thanks for joining me. I thought it was a great time, and I hope you did too. See you for the next module. Bye.